God has given all of us a mission to make disciples here and everywhere for the glory of God.
Minus 10, 9.
We want our church to be a launch pad for sending people out on the mission God has for them. Regardless of who you are, we all have a role to play. We are all involved in God's story. We pray that the story shared through Mission Control will encourage you to see how God is calling you to be used by Him. Hello, my name is Amanda Levy, and I'm the Communications Director here at First Baptist Melbourne and the host of this podcast. And today we have Travis Woernley. Did I say that right?
You said it right.
Whew, I should have asked that before we started recording. But
done.
Travis is our church planting resident here at First Baptist Melbourne, and he's hoping to plant a new church in Titusville with the partnership of the Grove Church, which this is a little bit of a new territory, partnering with another church for church planting, but it's all part of our Launch 10X goal of planting 10 churches in 10 years, and you would be plant 4?
4, yes.
Plant 4, almost halfway there.
Let's
Let's
go.
Before we get into all of that, though, I love to start with a space-themed icebreaker question.
Love it.
Before I ask the question, where would you put yourself on the spectrum of like familiarity or love of space-themed pop culture, like movies?
I don't know. I think my knowledge might fall off sometime in the 90s or early 2000s. So all the good movies, I would say, like Armageddon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, with that in mind, if you could join the crew of any fictional spacecraft or spaceship, like the Millennium Falcon,
Of course.
or the Starship Enterprise, or the Guardians of the Galaxy Milano, which would you choose and why?
Well, I realize now that maybe my pop culture isn't nearly as on point because I didn't know the name
It doesn't
of the
have to be.
galaxy.
I didn't either. This was ChatGPT, if we're being honest. But I am like somewhat familiar with Guardians of the Galaxy, and it doesn't have to be one of those. So if you have another fictional spaceship crew in mind.
I think that I want to have fun with this a little bit, and I want to go to the Jetsons and talk about, something that's a little bit more practical, something that I can pick up the groceries in, I can take the kids to school in, and it makes a cool little sound, that little, you remember the sound?
I'm not super familiar. I know of the Jetsons.
I went beyond the 90s on that. I realized that's like early 90s and like even more.
When did the Jetsons come out?
I don't know exactly. I just know that I like have those like deep memories of the Jetsons and the Flintstones,
I feel like that would have been our childhood. We're about the same age.
Very early.
I think.
When did you graduate high school?
I have to remember this. 2011.
So yeah, we're close. Yeah, that was 2008. Yeah,
yeah.
But this was early. I mean, like Bugs Bunny was still cool and stuff like that. The good
Space Jam. Lots
Jam.
of space cartoons in there too.
Yes,
so the Jetsons.
yes.
So you would pick the Jetsons from a practical standpoint.
Practical.
Okay.
But if I wanted to be really fast, I think I would have to choose the one that Luke Skywalker flew in. Is that the
Millennium Falcon?
Millennium
I think.
Falcon?
Just because you want to do the button where what's that called? Where they
the
jump.
light speed one?
Yes.
Yeah, dude. And it just turns white with all the
That'd be nice.
flashing lights.
Your 45-minute commute. Imagine if you had the light speed option.
I wouldn't mind so much driving to Melbourne at all. I mean, it's worth it once I get down here, but the drive is intense.
Yeah.
And, I'm trying to drive the speed limit, and so
that's
things
good.
get wild out there when you're driving the
95.
speed limit.
95 is interesting.
Oh, it's fun. Yeah. But it's good. Yeah, that's what I would choose. I think if I wanted to get somewhere fast and, I can be a little bit of an adrenaline junkie, so I think the
Millennium Falcon
would be it. And Star Wars people are really, really shaking their head at me. Like, they're probably not going to want to be on my
Star Wars people shake their head at me all the time.
How dare you? This is blasphemous. You don't even know what you're talking about. I apologize.
You at least respect it, though.
I do. Mad respect for it.
So Star Wars people can put down their lightsabers.
Yes. That's awesome. Yeah.
Well, as much fun as it is to talk about outer space, thought we could talk a little bit about your space. So where does God currently have you on mission right now?
Yeah, so currently, I'm in the midst of a real waiting season.
Okay.
It's been over the last 2.5 years. I feel like God's been teaching me a lot about waiting, in that, when you're waiting, it's not inaction. It's actually it is an action. It's something that I'm doing, and I'm actively doing it. And I found that I don't really like to do it at all. Like, I'm not a good
Who does
wait. I can't wait very good. And so God's teaching me a lot through that. But through this season of waiting, there's been a lot of really cool ministry opportunities, like, outward. A lot of it's been God ministering to my heart, of course, and my family. And that's all been really good. I think over the last 2 years, our family has grown so close together, spending a lot more time together and recentering on our priorities and stuff like that. But through all that time is when I really started to feel the calling, actually, like a tangible, like, this is substantial, this is real calling. Hey, like, you're called to plant a church, to the point where, I felt like to not do it would be to be disobedient. Yeah. And so through that time, that's when this became real. Through this last 2 years, we started doing something called Feast Fridays at my house, with the intention of just getting families together to share a meal and to have good conversations about Jesus, and really coming without an agenda, letting it be from the overflow, and really letting it be natural, so where families feel comfortable. And so that's been a really cool thing. I like to say we feast on good food, but then we feast on God's word. And it's a little corny, but it's
When did
true,
you start that?
This was actually, we've just gone over a year.
Okay.
So for about a year, every Friday, we've been cooking food in our house for with the kids, about 20 to 25 people.
Whew, okay.
And our little, well, it's a good sized living room, but it's not a huge house. So, and with a bunch of kids running around, which it's a heavy amount. It feels small, it feels intimate, but it's really cool. Through that, we found that there's not really a lot of places for parents of young children to go and feel comfortable. You've got young kids, so you go to a restaurant and your kid's acting rambunctious. It's like, I can't control this thing.
Yeah.
He's got free will.
Yeah.
And I do my best to make sure he's not standing on the table and throwing food and stuff like that, or throwing a tantrum. But in those places, we feel like uncomfortable, like we're inconveniencing people. And so I think, too, that translates into community within the church. Young families with young kids don't feel comfortable going to people's houses because they don't want their kid to break something. What are you going to do with the kids? Yeah. Yeah. And I'm like, hey, our kids have
already broken
everything. Yeah. There's nothing your kids can do that my kids haven't already done. And so through that, we've had crayon on the wall, we've had lots of spilt drinks and all that, but it's been really cool. And it wasn't, we didn't start out with this like, hey, we need a place for families to gather. It opened our eyes up as we started doing this. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is something that is really necessary. And have a place that families can come and really truly feel comfortable to just let their kids be kids. Yeah. And so that's been really cool. We've really enjoyed that. And the hospitality side of it has been, because there's plenty of Fridays where I'm like, I'm tired. Yeah. I just don't feel like being around a whole bunch of people, but I don't feel like cooking, I don't feel like cleaning. And
do y'all cook the same thing every week?
No, we switch it up.
Okay. Now, do you have like a rotation?
We have started a formal rotation.
Okay.
Tacos are big.
Sure.
I actually bought a Blackstone. This was like an excuse, like, hey, like...
Well, we gotta feed the feast Friday.
You know? Yeah, and we used it every Friday. We did hibachi one time, too much. So we have simmered down quite a bit. It's not nearly as intense as it once was, you know? We're like, let's be realistic, let's be practical, you know? And it was really hot over that grill, you know? So I'd get done cooking, I'd be sweating, smelling like grease, and I'd go in there and I'm like, how's everybody doing? Like, I just need to take a shower. So yeah, no, we got some meals like tacos, we got hamburgers. We do this old recipe called German spaghetti, which was just been passed
German
down.
Spaghetti?
It's like elbow noodles with this. It's tomato sauce.
Okay.
And you just add celery salt and celery seed, salt, and onion, the onion flakes. You know, you know, and the shaker.
Are they just called onion flakes?
They might be.
They might be.
So it's real simple.
Grade our paper later.
Yes, it's been passed down. Actually, it's something that my mom's mom, and maybe even her mom, cooked.
Okay.
So it was one I grew up with.
Is it like a baked spaghetti thing?
No, it's in a pot. It's real easy. Oh, and you got hamburger. You brown the hamburger. It's just like real easy. So and it's really good. And so it's a mix up from spaghetti, and you don't have to twirl
the elbow noodle.
Yeah, it's easy.
Just change the shape of the noodle. Totally different dish.
It's exactly. And it's really good. So yeah, we switch it up a little bit, but the goal is just like, we just want people to come. So people will ask like, hey, can we bring anything? I'm like, no. Like, are you sure? I'm like, no. Like, don't bring anything. I'm actually very sure, you know, because the whole idea was we want the yes to be as easy as possible. There's no like hitches to this. There's nothing standing in your way. You just come and enjoy. And the overall umbrella of this, which is a big heartbeat for the vision of the church, is Acts 2:42 through 47. And that's just a profound passage, just thinking about Christian brothers and sisters coming together and to summarize it into 2 words is lacked nothing. That these families lacked nothing. They came together and they were doing life in such a way that nobody had a want for anything. They were all satisfied and fulfilled, and it was fulfilled through community. And so that's really what kind of started the motivation. And here we are a year later, and maybe these families will want to plant a church too.
The families, are these families that you've met at church, like, or just friends? What's kind of the glue here, or is the glue just you and your wife?
Well, it's a little bit of a mixture, actually. There is some of the core families there that, because beforehand I was like, hey, I went to 2 of my friends. I was like, you know, if we're going to do this, I need more than just me to be bought in, right?
Yeah.
Like, are you going to be down to come every Friday?
Yeah.
And I mean, like, every Friday, you know, and you know, emergencies happen, stuff like that, but is this something you're
committing to?
Yeah. And so I had those 2 families commit, and they're like, yeah, dude, this sounds awesome, you know. And I met them through, oh my gosh, no, I only met one of those 2 through the church. Actually, the funny story is one guy I met at the gym, and it was in the locker room, which sounds weird, but it's not. Okay, like, let me just explain. He was already fully dressed and ready to go to work, and I noticed that he was a car salesman. And so I used to sell cars, and so I just easy intro. He's washing his hands, I'm washing my hands.
You had this thing in common.
You sell some cars today, right? And he's like, I hope so, you know. And from that conversation sparked this really great friendship that was 4 years ago, maybe more. And from that conversation, he ended up coming to the Grove where I was the student pastor. He ended up serving. Him and his wife started serving at Grove students. And so that's how that started. And then we have another family that's with us. I met him at a coffee shop. I was sitting having coffee, and he walked by and heard our conversation, came back, and it's funny. He's like, "Are you guys talking about the Lord?" And I was like, "Well, yes, we are."
Welcome.
Yeah. It's like, so coming to find out, him and his wife been praying about finding fellowship. And they couldn't find a church that they were really feeling at home at. And long story short, over the period of probably close to a year, like of trying to get connected, he ends up coming to Feast Friday, and now he's one of my dear friends, and his wife is one of my wife's dear friends, and we probably see each other sometimes twice a week, and spend time together. They've got young kids, so nice. God used a
chance encounter.
Yeah, and like he was eavesdropping, like, bro, this is an A and B conversation, but I'm so glad that he had that boldness, and he responded to the Holy Spirit to come back, because now this is one of the guys that I really truly think of as a brother. And then another friend of mine was met through church, but not the church that I was going to, and so there's a little bit of a mixture, and but they are relationships that for the most part had been developing over the years that I invited to come, and then this just kind of like set the friendship in, which is great. And so awesome. We haven't had any real blowouts yet.
That's good.
Like, because you spend enough time with people, you start to see different sides of people, which is what's ugly about community, but also it's beautiful about community.
The perfect opportunity to be constantly practicing restoration and grace and forgiveness. You got to be willing to walk through that whole cycle, and that's where things can get ugly. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's going to get ugly, period, but
eventually, it's your willingness to work through that ugliness to find the restoration, which is beautiful, far more beautiful than it was before even the ugliness, and like I've heard that there's like levels, there's phases of community. When you spend enough time with people, you'll have like this almost like a honeymoon stage where everything's awesome, and then it kind of like just becomes whatever it is, but eventually you're gonna have conflict because we're people, and you have your opinion, I have my opinion, and the difference,
especially with kids involved.
Because you know what, you parent your kids different than I do, and and I could easily let that become a wedge between what God's trying to do in the community. And so that in and of itself's been a learning experience, and just realizing like, I'm partnering with these families, and they're partnering with my family. We're doing this thing together, and letting the Holy Spirit be present and guiding us through this whole thing, And so it's like your closest relationships, are the ones that you've gone through the most with.
Yes.
And by the most, I mean like you've dealt with confrontation and gotten through it.
Yes.
And so like it just goes back to the whole like, who are we becoming? If we're hopefully becoming like Jesus, but at the end of the day, like if we were to put, 2 words on it, it would be unconditional love. Like we want to be a community that is becoming unconditional love. And you can't be in community and not practice unconditional love. So that's been a really big thing, and it's been so awesome. And then through that, I've gone to the Sin Network's assessment, and got a yellow light, just got my green light, and so ready to roll with that, with the church planting side of things through the Southern Baptist Convention. And in that time period, from like the assessment to now, I felt like it was a good time to go back to school. And me and my wife kind of had this moment where we kind of just agreed on it before we actually
That's like the perfect.
Yeah, it was awesome.
When God works on each of you separately and you come together and you're like, wait, this has been happening to both of us?
Yeah, there's you can't get out of it at that point, right?
And there's no greater sense of confirmation.
Exactly, yeah, and I love that, man. God's just so good in giving you those little moments where you feel like, you know what, I'm on the right path. Like I feel like I'm moving in the right direction. And I think if I could summarize the last 2.5 years up to this point, it's been, it would be that time and time again, God has really revealed himself overall through all of this. But he has revealed that I am in the right place. I'm where I'm supposed to be. Not anywhere near where I want to be.
Sure.
Not anywhere near where I'm going, but I'm in the right place. And praise God for Aaron, too, because he just reminded me that yesterday, too. He's like, hey, we're on track. I'm like, but there's so much to do.
You're like, but are we? Because it feels so far away.
Are you sure? But he's so good, and he's just so great to be there as an encouragement. Such an incredible pastor, just an incredible church. So glad that my family and I can be at First Baptist Melbourne, where it's not just empty sayings. This is a real life thing. This life that is discipling after Jesus, and to be able to glean from everyone here, these pastors that are the real deal, you know, and it's so good. Yeah. So really long answer to this is where I'm at right now.
Hey, no, I like it. How did you kind of get here? What was your upbringing like? Were you raised in a Christian home? What was kind of like your salvation story? Yeah,
I love this question because it's just, you can't miss God's hand on it. The whole thing. I guess I did grow up in a Christian household.
Okay.
And, you know, I always like to just emphasize that I have an incredible family. I have an incredible dad and mom and stepmom and stepdad, and like, and couldn't be more thankful for them and everything that they've done. But the reality is we didn't have like a heavy Christian upbringing in our house. And my dad would probably push back on that, but here's my interpretation of growing up was my dad did an incredible job of assuring me and my family, my brother and my sister, that God is the most important thing in our lives. And so he set a strong foundation there that was like, there is a God, and he is the ultimate source of everything, and he will provide. And so I had that basic and simple faith, which was perfect for me at that time. But I didn't really know much more than that. You know, people would talk about Jesus, but I was like, they're the same, but they're different. And I like, you know, and like that was very confusing for me, but I was scared to ask anybody.
Gotcha.
You know, and so growing up that way, not going to church consistently, and really, I always say that baseball was my God.
Gotcha.
The baseball field was my church.
Gotcha.
I was travel ball from like the age of 12 all the way to when I was 18. So it was baseball. And so that was a big part of my upbringing. And then when I graduated high school, kind of had the mentality, which was not a good mentality at all. It was just that if nobody is trying to get me on their team for college, then I'm not interested. Okay. Like as if I was 6'5", you know, 270 pounds and hitting home runs like Aaron Judge, you know, like there's a deep divide there between this guy and me. Sure. And so there was work that needed to happen, but I didn't really, you know, I wasn't in FCA, which I, you know, which I love because it gave me the perspective for why FCA is so important. And anyway, so when I graduated from high school, I lost a major part of my identity. I mean, it was who I was. I still live in a town where I grew up, where people know me as.
So you grew up in this area?
I grew up in Titusville.
Okay.
And Titusville is a small town. You know, you bump into the people that you've been bumping into at the grocery store. Every time you go to the grocery store, it's awesome. And also, like, you know, you sometimes you just want to go to the grocery store and get your stuff, you know. But
the constant like reminder of a time that maybe isn't there anymore.
Like, listen, I'm 35 years old and I'm still calling my coach from minors coach, you know, like this is how long we've been doing life together, you know. Like you're my coach forever. Like that's just the way it is. And so like people that I've grown up with, the parents that raised me alongside of my parents on the baseball field, they know me as Travis, the baseball player.
Gotcha.
And that was who I was.
Gotcha.
And so when I graduated high school, I didn't have baseball. I kind of just fell off and did what most people will do who don't know Jesus. And I lived for myself. I was living for myself all the way up to that point anyway, but it became more about
you didn't have the identity that you had built so much of your life around at that point.
And I had to find an identity. So now it was all about like, well, what do I do? And so of course it became and I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. People would ask me like, hey, where do you see yourself in 10 years?
You've been so focused on baseball.
Yeah. And I'm like, I'm going to go pro. Like, why did I even think
Obviously.
that? What makes you think that you're going to go pro, Travis? I don't know. I just have this gut feeling, you know? Like, that's just the way that it's supposed to be. And so anyway, like I didn't have a direction. I didn't know where I was going. And so I just floundered. I call the time frame between 18 and about 21 my like dark ages. And so I used to say that nothing happened in that 18 to 21 year phase, but a lot was happening in that little time frame there. And so I think about, you know, how in the dark is a lot of the times when things start to grow, when things break down and the soil starts to get fertile and starts to be a place where life can start to grow. And looking back, that's exactly what was happening. A lot of things in my life had to die, and through that death, there was a real opportunity for a revival. And that's what happened, you know. So when I turned 21, I hit a wall, and I realized that I was full of pride. I was full of arrogance. I didn't want to ask for help. This was the toughest time of my life at that point, where I was getting in trouble for the same things over and over again, and I was finding myself in a place that nobody wants to be in. And it was in that place, after going a couple of times in 1 year, that I had this like out of body experience, and it was pretty wild. And I, at the time, wasn't really sure, because I didn't have a relationship with God that was like, I didn't have much there to go with. But now looking back, I know for sure that God was speaking to me in this moment, and he spoke to me with a question and a statement. And he asked, when are you going to take responsibility? And he said, you were made for more than this. And, you know, of course, it was in my head. It was my voice. And I attribute that to God. I wish it was like Morgan Freeman's voice and like everything was like rumbling and stuff. But it was just this moment where I literally felt like I was like the tiniest little ant. Like it was like a zooming out type of scene in a movie, you know, where the guy gets so small and the world's so big and all that. And it was just the wildest thing. And so that moment I went back up to my little room and I went to sleep. And a couple of days later, my dad picked me up. And at the time I was living with some friends. That was just a toxic situation. And my dad, that drive to my home from where he picked me up was a long and quiet drive. And it was an awkward drive. And I'll never forget it because it was quiet all the way there to my place. And we parked, and my dad said, "Hey, pride will destroy you." And at that moment, I realized that I needed to ask for help. And so I just said, "Dad, I need help." Mm-hmm. And so that was a real turning point in my life that led to really where I am today. Because from that moment, I moved back in with my dad, and I'm a 21-year-old, and moving back in your dad's house isn't cool. You don't go and post that on Facebook. "Hey guys,
look at where I am.
Threw my life away. Here I am." I slept on a fold-out couch, and every night, here's the process. Every night I'd fold out my couch, and every morning I would fold it back in. And I would drive to work with my dad. I had gotten a job there where he worked in Orlando. So I was dependent on a drive with him to this, and it was a sweatshop. And they actually, the day that I left that job was the day that they turned on the AC in the warehouse.
Well, of course, they were just waiting for you to leave.
Come on, dude. This whole time. So anyway, that was my everyday life. And, man, I'm so thankful. I wish that he still had that couch, because I would buy it and put it in my garage just so I could look at it, you know, because it's just like an anchor, like an altar even, you know, of just where I was to where I am now. But it was because I moved in with my dad that I started going to church every Sunday at Park Avenue Baptist in Titusville. And I just remember weeping in worship, and I'm like, what is wrong with me? I don't know what's happening. And I didn't know what was happening, but I just knew that I'm filled with joy, but I'm also crying. I'm just so confused right now. And it was good. I don't remember really much of the messages. There wasn't anything that the pastor said. Pastor Richard Lord was there, and I remember just loving him. He was just so kind and so humble and just such a great and godly guy. But it was nothing that he really said that moved me. Yeah. It was actually just
the Spirit of the Lord moving. Yeah.
And I didn't know how to attribute it in any way. I didn't have the language for it. I didn't know, Yeah. And so I wouldn't have been going to church on Sunday if I hadn't moved in with my dad. And that led to another thing that would have never happened if I wasn't living with my dad, which was how I ran into my wife, Crystal. So I've known Crystal since I was 12 and met in 7th grade. And I would flirt with her in business class by rolling my chair back to block her, which she hated. And I was like, I was flirting. She's like, you were mean. I'm like, I was a 7th grade boy. I didn't know what else to do. But anyways, we ended up being friends all the way through high school, never dated or anything. And I just say that I really believe God was protecting us, because I would have definitely messed it up so bad. And he's like, I'm going to protect this for when this thing happens later on. And I'm so glad he did, because, I ran into her at my younger sister's concert in high school, and Crystal, my wife, happened to be there for her brother's concert, and I would never have been there just because I was an incredible brother. I lived in town, but I wouldn't have been there. I don't know if I would have known about it. It's sad to think that, but because I went through what I went through, and I moved in with my dad, and I was there, and I ran into her, and I like to say it was just magic ever since. Her story is a little bit different. We went on a date.
She wouldn't use the word magic from there.
It was bliss. It was like a fairy tale. It was like time stood still, and her story is like, you came and sat next to me. And Like
yes, magical.
I was drawn to you. I don't know what happened. And so anyway, we ended up going on a date, and then from there, like, we were inseparable. We were dating for a few months before we got engaged, and we were married, and such a short period of time. But it was in our premarital counseling, which, side note, we did premarital counseling because it would give you a discount on your license, marriage license. So we're like, cool. You could do it at church for free. I'm like, free discount?
Even better.
Let's go. And so we had a relationship sort of with Park Avenue. So we tried them and ended up in premarital counseling with Pastor Dan Ferguson, who is just incredible man that I adore, and for a lot of reasons, but one, because me and Crystal would confess Jesus as our Lord and Savior on the last day of that premarital counseling before getting married, with Dan being as direct and as clear with the gospel as I've ever been told. Mm-hmm. And it was in that moment that we gave our life to the Lord together. And we were baptized, and then we were married, and then just tons and tons of things after that just kept happening. And I truly believe that it started in that moment, that out-of-body experience, where now I look back and I'm like, that was God. Yeah. And I turned away from where I was and what I was doing, and I turned towards God, and wouldn't you know, like, that He would start blessing the things that I was doing, because I was doing them in a more pure heart than what it was, and like, I'm talking like new jobs, new opportunities, and just new things happening. And the greatest gift out of all of that, aside from salvation, of course, is that I met my wife through it, who now we've been married 10 years, have 3 kids, and it's like just crazy. But it was all that ended up getting me to entering into full-time ministry too. And so
so what was that? What was that process like for you?
So I always felt alive when I helped people. Okay. Like when I got to be a part of something that helps somebody go from one place to a better place. And I've always enjoyed, like, just coaching and doing stuff like that. And anyway, like, I didn't know what any of that meant. I was in sales by the time, so I left that work.
The sweatshop. They turned on the AC.
Put on a polo and some dress slacks, and started selling appliances at Sears in Titusville.
Oh boy!
Ever heard of Sears before?
Oh yeah,
it's a real deal
for sure.
And so that was a big deal. I started selling, started communicating, and started working with people, and I found I like working with people. I like relationships, and I like providing a solution and helping people who have a problem find this solution. And so that was crazy. So I thought, I'm supposed to be a salesperson. Like, I'm supposed to, like, I think that I'm going to be a real estate agent or something like that. And so that didn't work out. That never did. Weirdest thing would happen eventually is that I got to this place where I went from being like one of the top salespersons in our league in Florida. So like out of 100, I was in the top 10. I was like, I'm the man, just typical sales person behavior, which is great. Like it was this this desire for excellence, and I was having fun doing it. And so at the time it was great, and I had a lot of pride in the fact that I was doing really well. I was getting noticed by the district manager, and that relationship started to form. And so like that would inevitably lead me to this place where I would get a position that I did not deserve at a store in Merritt Island, where I was leading half of the Sears. So there was the store manager, and then there was me and another manager. And I'm 24 years old. But sometime in between that and me selling, I started having a hard time overcoming some of the objections that I was getting, because we'd sell protection agreements, the extended warranty. And I really believed in them. I thought they were great, and I wouldn't feel like I was getting over on anybody, but for some reason, there's like this point where it was like, they said no. And it was weird, and I was like, who am I? Like, what's going on? I can't sell anymore. But God shifted me out of that position before it became too much of a problem, and I became the manager over all of the sales departments, which was crazy. But then Sears reconfigured everything. And this was like the third time they've done this while I was working for them. And so I was like, I'm not about this anymore. And I'm not taking a chance on this. I'm not reapplying for a position and doing all that. So I took my severance package before I got a job, thinking I got time. Started looking for jobs. Come to find out, I'm underqualified and overqualified all at the same time.
That is a beautiful place to be.
Yeah, with a baby that's like 1, and my wife is staying at home with her. I'm like, oh no, I made a mistake, and it's too late. And so I'm applying for these jobs. I'm looking at the equivalent position that I'm in requires 2 years of sales or management experience. I have like 8 months. And I'm like, we're in trouble. So I saw this position at Marshall's, the store in Titusville was looking for a store manager. I'm like, I can't get a position for my position. Why don't I go for a store manager position? Because that makes sense, right? So I applied for it. I get a call, and I get this interview, and it goes to a second interview, and push comes to shove, they're ready to offer me a position. And it wasn't the store manager position because I wasn't there yet, but I applied and got in the door. He liked me, and then I got this job at Marshall's, and they put me in the university stores, what they called. It's where they trained the managers and then sent them to their stores.
Okay.
Well, they didn't have a store for me.
Okay.
So they made a position for me there to work at the university store, and all of like grooming me to become a store manager.
Okay.
Well, that drive was about 45 minutes every day. And that was like not my favorite thing in the world, but it was the best thing that I could have ever experienced.
Uh-huh.
It's when I really felt God calling me more than I've ever felt before, like the presence of the Holy Spirit in that tiny little Honda Civic at the time, blaring Hillsong, and it just gave me an opportunity of undivided attention with God, just truly pouring my heart out towards Him for 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And the same thing
Each way.
I'd like put in some books in there every now and then,
Gotcha.
but on the way there, it was definitely like get my mind ready for this because I wasn't like loving it. Mm-hmm. And it's clear that this wasn't what I was supposed to do. But it was in those drives that I felt like, you know what, maybe God's calling me to be a pastor. And I'm like, why do I think
where'd this come from?
I don't even know what a pastor is. And so I started looking at going to Bible college and what that would do. And so I was like, how do I get there? I was making calls. I don't even remember what schools I was calling. Probably not even good school. But I got along that process, and then I decided I'm going to get my personal training certification instead.
That makes sense. Pastor, personal trainer, you know.
I'm like, dude, God can use me here. This is what it is. It's just like this sidestep, like justifying my actions. And so all the while I'm working at Marshall, I know this isn't it because I would work like 13-hour days, and there would be times where I would leave before my family would get up.
And you'd get home after they were asleep.
And they were sleeping. So there would literally be days that I wouldn't see my family. And so those two things happening all at the same time, it's like, this is clearly not what I'm supposed to be doing. And so personal training certification, and I get a phone call all in the midst of this that from the car dealership in town. And said, because I had applied there before, but it didn't work out. Uh-huh. And so he called me and says, hey, are you still interested in working here? And I was like, yeah. I mean, I'm open to hearing whatever, opportunity might come to see what's up. I ended up having an interview with the owner at the time, and he offers me this job like on the spot. And as a commissioned salesperson selling cars, normally you get a draw. in my experiences, I got a draw, which was like a base salary, and then you sell to make more. Yeah. And I was offered this draw that was unheard of. Okay. It covered everything I needed.
All of your expenses.
Yeah. And I didn't know at the time. I'm thinking about it, I'm like, dude, why did you do that? That's insane. Like, you didn't even give me any motivation to sell, which I was motivated to sell. But God just like provided this way that I took that job because I was like, trade a 45-minute drive for a 5-minute drive. Got this 5-minute drive, and with the car dealership, it was closed on Sundays. It was a neighborhood, small town, family-owned dealership. It sold Honda, Ford, and GMC, so it was a real dealership. Not like, you know what I mean?
Not a fake one.
Yeah.
Legitimate car dealership.
Like,
got it.
New cars with real
I believe you.
Ford, actual Ford sign. But they were closed on Sunday. And for years, I wasn't able to consistently go to church. And this opened up the door where not only am I like 5 minutes away from home, but I get to take my family to church. And so that's when we started going to the Grove consistently. And so because I took that job, I was at church when Pastor Brad announced to the congregation that they were looking for a youth pastor. And this is funny because he announces that, and I'm just sitting there, and I'm like, nodding. I'm like, yeah. And Crystal elbows me. I'm like, what? She's like, and I'm like, no, you're crazy. Like 5 days later, I'm sitting in front of Brad at lunch, the subway across the street from the dealership, because their office was literally directly across the street from my desk. So I just sit there and watch them, like coming and going, and I'm like, in just this place of like, where you got me, God, where you got me going. And so anyway, I get this. I sit down with him, and his encouragement to me was like, hey, start serving at Grove students and let's see where it goes. And at that point, it was 2018, I started serving like that Wednesday. And between that time and 2022, I don't think I missed one Wednesday other than when my two youngest kids were born. And so
I feel like that's a justifiable reason to miss.
Yeah. Like, it'll take some time off, but I was sitting there like, what's happening? But that opened the door for me to get into student ministry. It was in 2000. It was later on in 2018 that they started talking like, hey, we want you to be a co-student pastor with the other student pastor at the time, because they hadn't picked one yet. And then it was in like, this must have been, it was in 2018, so it must have been like in October, sometime in the early part of the school year, where FCA reaches out to Oscar, my co-pastor at the time, and say, hey, we want to get breakfast, because me and him were doing huddles. We didn't call them huddles, but we were character coaching. And at the time had like 12 different teams between the two schools in town. And so next thing I know, I'm sitting in front of Dan Carter and Jason Shack, and they're asking, hey, how can we help you? We want to come alongside of you. You guys are doing a great job, FCA, all the great things Fellowship Christian Athletes has to offer. We want to be able to resource you and be a partner. And through all that, I like stopped. It was like, wait a second, you guys do this for a living? And they looked at me funny, like I had like kind of like insulted them. And I was like, no. Like,
what a killer job.
That's awesome. And they're like, well, but and come to find out, we raised our support. And I'm like, there's the catch. I knew there was a catch. Well, next thing you know, I'm sitting in front of Dan Carter at McDonald's talking about what it looks like to come on staff. And short period of time from there, I'm on a plane going to Kansas City to learn how to fundraise for their support raising systems. And they called it boot camp. And I'm sitting there 2019, left my secular quote unquote job
mm-hmm.
and was full-time ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And in that process, the Grove said, hey, you want to work for FCA? Well, we want you to be our student pastor. Let's do this thing together.
Mm-hmm.
And so all unintended movement through my life led to that point where I'm just by chance sitting in front of these guys at this given time.
Yeah.
And in 2019, I burnt the ships, and it's been history ever since. So that's how I got into ministry.
I'd be remiss if I didn't say at this point, I've joked, and one day I'm going to act on this, that I might put like a board in the background, and it's the degrees of separation to Dan Carter or FCA, because it just seems like every single person who comes onto the podcast in one way or another ties back to Dan Carter. Dan Carter and FCA. There's just so much there. And so here, yet another. Just add the string right here, Travis, Dan.
He is the blue dot that is like away.
Is it coming or going? Who knows?
We don't know.
It's Dan Carter.
So grateful for Dan Carter and Jason Jack. Man, they've been just instrumental in my life, and especially Jason has been through all of the highs and lows of my life since 2019. Like I didn't know what I was doing when I was getting into pastoring students. And I don't know if I probably shouldn't have even been the student pastor at the time. I'm so glad I was, because it opened up so many doors and made me realize my calling is like, I can't do anything but this.
Mm-hmm.
And Jason, he was like, I ran his plays a lot of the times at Grove students, and we saw tremendous growth there. And anytime I would have some sort of, he's my boss, but it felt like my pastor. And I really believe that in many ways he's just like a spiritual father, and just has been an incredible guy. There's no surprise there why FCA now, at the time was 3 around of a table. Now it's 25 sitting around a table.
Yeah.
So just an incredible story.
That is incredible. Well, we're running out of time a little bit, but before we wrap things up, what advice would you have for someone who's maybe listening to all this, they're hearing all of this, and they're like, yes, I also want to answer that call to make disciples here and everywhere. What advice? How does someone start?
Well, I think that where I'm at now, the best place to start is getting alone with the Lord and just really letting him minister to your heart, and focusing so much on your love and adoration for him, and just really finding a place of just humility and gratitude of just how much he has really done for us and for you particularly, and me particularly, and just start there. And I think that from that place, so much is going to happen. Your eyes are going to be open to new things, and you're going to realize that even where you're at, there's so many great opportunities to be the one who is on mission for King Jesus. It's in the context that you're in. And I think to add to that and to finish with this is that God's given you exactly what you need for the time and place that you're in. And when you look at the parable of the talents and think about the overall idea of stewardship, and you see that the ones who were faithful were ones that took what the master had given them and multiplied it. And so they not only took great care of what they had, but they went out and they multiplied what they were given. And so I think that being present and knowing exactly where you are is a great place to start. And then from there, just seeking God and asking him what the next step might be. I think that may not be what people want to hear, because they're looking for 1, 2, 3 steps and ABC. This is where you go. And And I just have found that that's not the way it works. I think I am here today in this seat because of doors that have opened up in front of me. I wasn't like, there's a door that opened in front of me. I went through it and I felt like, God, you know what? If this door was opened, I'm going to believe that you put it here, and I'm going to trust you. I'm going to walk through the door. And a lot of those doors have led to hallways. But many of those doors have led to rooms that I have spent a lot of time in, and that's exactly where I'm at. I credit all of what God has done in my life to being present and being willing to explore the opportunities that he's put in front of me in the time and place that I'm in. Because anytime I've ever gone around it or tried to look for another door, my own door, that's when I've delayed things like personal training certification. Like I only delayed what God was wanting to do because I decided to go and do something else instead of trusting God and his timing in the process. So get alone with the Lord, spend time with him, focus on being with him and just resting and abiding in the Lord, and trust that he's going to open up the doors in front of you and lead you in the way that you should go. And I think that's about where I would go. Awesome.
I like that the visual of a lot of the doors that were opened led to hallways. I don't know, I just think that's a really nice visual to understand. I think all of us can kind of relate to that. And then there are some doors that lead to rooms. So it sounds like you're in a waiting room right now, but there's stuff happening. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what the next door looks like, and looking forward to seeing the church plant happen and all that God's going to provide through that. So thanks for coming today and sharing with us.
Thank you for having me. It was a blast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Mission Control. If you're interested in learning more about Launch 10X and the different ways to get involved in what God is doing here at First Baptist Melbourne, a great place to start would be visiting our website, launchme.church.